The year is 1925. Gaslight flickers on floral wallpaper. A ticking clock marks the only sound in a quiet home. Outside, the jazz age is roaring, but inside America's modest dining rooms, supper is a sacred ritual. And on these worn oak tables, something magical unfolds every evening. Not extravagance, but warmth. Not fame, but forgotten flavors. Before frozen dinners and TV trays, families sat shoulder to shoulder, sharing roast capons soaked in sage and onion drippings, scalloped oysters swimming in creamy indulgence, and jellied veal loaf sharp with horseradish bite. These weren't rich men's feasts, but they were the pride of the middle class. Dishes passed from mother to daughter, handwritten on browned recipe cards now lost to time. Tonight, we're lighting the gas lamp one more time. Reviving carrot ring molds, pickled beets with eggs, and queen pudding crowned with golden meringue. This isn't just about food. This is a journey back to the 1920s supper table, where every bite tells a story. If you're willing to taste the past, let's begin. In the gentle glow of a gaslight kitchen, the centerpiece of a true 1920s middle-class supper wasn't turkey, nor humble chicken, it was the roast capon. Bigger than a hen, more tender than a rooster, the capon was the prized bird of the era. Castrated young to yield richer meat, it was considered a symbol of Sunday best, served when company came over or when the family had something to celebrate. But the real soul of this dish? That would be the sage and onion dressing. A stuffing so aromatic, it could perfume the whole house. Breadcrumbs soaked in hot milk, caramelized onions, chopped celery, a pat of butter, and freshly crushed sage, pungent, earthy, and grounding. The kind of aroma that made children race in from the porch and fathers quietly loosen their ties at the table. The capon would be rubbed with lard or butter, stuffed until bursting, then slow roasted in a coal or kerosene oven for hours, basted with its own golden drippings, skin crackling to a perfect mahogany finish. Every slice of meat, moist and herb-scented, served with a dollop of gravy thickened right from the roasting pan. This was no casual weekday dinner. This was a ritual of comfort, made by hands that measured not in cups, but in memory. Today, most kitchens don't even know what a capon is. But back then it was a household name. And reviving it? Well, it's like bringing back a forgotten symphony, one that played in the heart of every modest American home, nearly a century ago. Would you dare to taste what time left behind?
In the 1920s, oysters weren't a delicacy of the elite. They were everyday food. Served not in champagne-soaked soirees, but in the humble kitchens of America's gaslight era. And no dish captured that coastal charm with quiet elegance like scalloped oysters in cream sauce. This wasn't a fancy restaurant plate. It was a middle-class masterpiece, passed through small-town cafe menus and handwritten supper notes. Fresh oysters, briny, plump, and shucked by hand, were gently folded into a velvety bechamel. Butter, flour, scalded milk, and just a pinch of mace or white pepper. A whisper of cream added richness. And then came the layering. In a buttered casserole, the oysters were nestled between sheets of cracker crumbs or torn bits of stale bread. A touch of grated onion. A spoonful of cream. Then another layer. Like a symphony in quiet harmony. It was topped with golden crumbs, sometimes a splash of oyster liquor, then baked, slowly, until bubbling, brown-edged, and impossibly fragrant. In coastal towns and landlocked cities alike, this dish brought the taste of the sea to the family table. Not extravagant, but graceful. Not overdone, but intimate. For many families, it was a Christmas Eve tradition or a Sunday supper centerpiece when the preacher came to dine. You wouldn't waste it on the everyday. No, scalloped oysters were reserved for moments that mattered. And now, nearly a century later, that simple casserole, so creamy, so delicate, has all but vanished. But if you close your eyes, you can almost hear the bubbling pan, feel the warmth of the oven door opening, and smell that unmistakable blend of butter, sea, and memory. Would you bring it back?
It sat on chilled plates, glistening like cut glass under the glow of a gaslight chandelier. Jellied Ve Loaf, the forgotten supper star of 1920s middle-class America. To modern eyes, it may seem strange. But in its time, this dish was the height of refinement. A showcase of thrift, technique, and a quiet elegance that once defined the American homemaker. Back then, veal was tender, affordable, and considered a gentle meat, ideal for delicate evening meals. It was simmered slowly with aromatic vegetables until the meat nearly fell apart. But the secret lay in what came next. The strained broth, rich in natural gelatin, was clarified and reduced, then molded around shreds of veal, sometimes with slivers of pimento, celery, or hard-boiled egg layered inside like edible stained glass. Once chilled, it set into a loaf, firm but tender. Sliced and served cold with a bold horseradish cream, the contrast was unforgettable. Smooth, cool meat against the sharp, nose-tingling bite of horseradish, a dish that woke up the palate without raising a single flame. You'd find it at garden luncheons, church suppers, or summer evening spreads where gas stoves stayed off and every bite was served with a side of restraint. It wasn't flashy, but it was proud. A reflection of a time when presentation mattered and flavor didn't need excess. Today, gelatin molds are mocked, veal is rare, and horseradish sits mostly forgotten in the back of the fridge. But in 1925, this dish was a quiet showstopper. A symbol of culinary precision, balance, and the grace of a supper table lit by nothing but gaslight and family. Will it ever return? That depends. Are we ready to taste what patience once created? Today, it's just a side note on the plate, an afterthought, limp and forgotten. But in 1925, celery was a delicacy. Yes, celery. Before it became the silent stalk in supermarket aisles, celery was prized, exotic, expensive, and often proudly displayed in crystal vases on dinner tables as a centerpiece. And when it came time to serve it warm, one dish stood out: braised celery with buttered crumbs. This wasn't the raw crunch of today's diet plate. This was elegant, fragrant, and deeply satisfying. Whole celery ribs were carefully trimmed, peeled, and simmered in a light broth until tender, but never mushy. The secret? Time and care. Once softened, they were transferred to a shallow baking dish. Then came the finishing touch: a rich shower of breadcrumbs, toasted in real butter, often with a dash of paprika or grated cheese, then baked until golden. The result was simple, but noble. A dish that whispered instead of shouted. Silky celery beneath a crisp, buttery crust, served alongside roast meats or standing proudly in its own right during meatless Fridays or summer suppers. For the middle-class families of the gaslight era, this wasn't just a vegetable. It was a statement of refinement, proof that even the humblest ingredient could shine when treated with respect. And yet today, no one talks about it. No one remembers how something so green, so ordinary, could feel like a luxury. But maybe it's time we did. Because in a world obsessed with bold and loud, braised celery with buttercrumbs reminds us of the quiet power of subtlety. Would you let it speak again? In a 1925 kitchen, where recipes lived in hand-me-down journals and stoves hissed quietly under gaslight, supper didn't need to be fancy. It needed to be filling, fragrant, and full of love. That's where stuffed bell peppers with minced pork and rice stepped in. Back then, peppers were not just a pop of color, they were a culinary vessel. Farmers grew them fresh, home cooks picked them firm and green, and families waited eagerly for what came next. Each pepper was carefully cored, its walls still crisp, its shape a perfect bowl. Inside went a warm, seasoned blend of minced pork, cooked rice, diced onion, and a touch of tomato puree. Salt, pepper, and sometimes a pinch of paprika or dried sage gave it depth. Nothing exotic. Just ingredients from the pantry, stretched with wisdom and heart. The peppers were nestled into baking dishes, drizzled with a little broth or tomato juice, then covered and slow-baked until tender. By the time the lids came off, the aroma filled every inch of the home, a promise of nourishment that didn't need a single word. This dish was a weeknight workhorse and a Sunday comfort. Served with mashed potatoes or buttered peas, it warmed the stomach and the soul. And because it made use of what was already on hand, leftover rice, cheaper cuts of pork, it was both practical and poetic. It was never flashy, but it was deeply American, rooted in immigrant kitchens, passed from generation to generation, and shared at supper tables where every bite counted. Today we scroll past it. But in 1925, stuffed bell peppers were the kind of dish that brought families together again and again. Because when food is made with care, even a humble pepper becomes unforgettable. In the quiet rhythm of 1925 American kitchens, nothing went to waste. Leftover roast chicken wasn't thrown out. It was reborn into something elegant, golden, and unforgettable. Chicken croquettes with parsley sauce weren't just supper, they were resourcefulness turned into refinement. It began with scraps of cold chicken, hand-chopped with care. Not ground, not blended, but minced, just enough to hold texture. Mixed with a thick bechamel, flour, butter, milk, a dash of nutmeg, and chilled until firm. Then came the shaping. Oval or cone-shaped, these croquettes were gently rolled in egg wash and breadcrumbs, then pan-fried to a deep, golden brown. Crispy on the outside, creamy and savory within. A perfect contrast. But what truly set this dish apart wasn't just the croquette. It was the parsley sauce, a silky white gravy flecked with finely chopped fresh parsley. Light, herbaceous, and cooling. It soothed the richness of the fried shell and brought brightness to every bite. In the 1920s, this dish made appearances at both weekday tables and church socials. It was economical, yes, but it looked like something much grander. Croquettes were the kind of food that made even the most modest family feel a little closer to fine dining. Served with mashed potatoes or stewed carrots, it didn't need fanfare. Just a quiet table, a dim gas lamp, and the familiar clink of forks and plates. Today, few remember the art of the croquette. Even fewer have tasted one the way it used to be. But in 1925, chicken croquettes with parsley sauce were more than just a way to use leftovers. They were a reminder that care, time, and imagination could turn scraps into supper, and supper into memory. Are we ready to bring them back? They weren't flashy. They weren't expensive. But in the kitchens of 1925 Main Street America, boiled new potatoes with dill butter were treated with the kind of reverence reserved for a Sunday roast. These weren't just any potatoes. They were new potatoes, harvested young, skin thin as parchment, flesh tender and sweet. In those days, families knew the seasons by their vegetables, and when these small golden orbs arrived, they were never taken for granted. Washed clean, not peeled, and gently simmered in salted water until just tender. Not mushy. Not starchy. Perfect. And then came the transformation. Fresh churned butter, still soft from the kitchen counter, was melted and stirred with chopped garden dill, sharp, grassy, and vibrant. It wasn't just about flavor, it was about fragrance. That unmistakable scent of butter and herb rising with the steam. The hot potatoes were tossed in this simple blend. No frying. No roasting. Just pure ingredients handled with patience and care. In an era before artificial flavors, this was a celebration of what nature gave, exactly as it came. Served beside roast meats, fish croquettes, or jellied veal, these little golden potatoes were the quiet star of the plate. And for children, it was often their first introduction to flavor beyond salt and pepper. Today, they'd be called a side. But in 1925, boiled new potatoes with dill butter were something else entirely. A sign of the season. A triumph of simplicity. A taste of home. So the question is, can we still find joy in something this humble? Or have we forgotten how powerful a potato can be? It was the age of molded elegance. Before TV dinners and fast food, before frozen peas were microwaved in plastic trays, there was a time when even the humblest vegetable was shaped into a centerpiece. And that's where the carrot ring mold with peas made its entrance. In the 1920s, serving vegetables wasn't just about nutrition. It was about presentation, pride, and ritual. A cook wasn't simply feeding a family, she was crafting a memory. And this dish? It was a showstopper in gaslit kitchens across Main Street America. It started with carrots, boiled tender and mashed to a smooth, vibrant orange puree. To that, the homemaker added beaten eggs, a splash of cream, a touch of flour or breadcrumbs, and a bit of grated onion for depth. Seasoned lightly with salt, pepper, and maybe a hint of nutmeg. Then came the magic, the mold. Poured into a ring mold, this carrot mixture was baked until it set, a warm, delicate custard with color as bright as sunrise. Once unmolded, it revealed a golden-orange wreath, soft, warm, and glowing. But that was only half the picture. Into the hollow center went peas, bright green, buttered, and steaming. The contrast of color was stunning. Orange and green. Earth and garden. Sweet and savory. It wasn't just food, it was art. You might find it served at a ladies' luncheon, an Easter supper, or a Sunday meal where the family gathered around in pressed collars and polished shoes. It whispered grace, economy, and a quiet confidence. Today, we barely remember molded vegetables. But in 1925, this dish wasn't odd, it was expected. It showed care. It showed skill. It made vegetables not just bearable, but beautiful. The carrot ring mold with peas may sound quaint now, but for one shining moment, it was the crown jewel of the dinner table. Would you dare to bring it back? They looked like something from a hotel dining room. But believe it or not, savory rice Timbles were born right in the modest kitchens of 1920s middle-class America. In a time when food was expected to be beautiful, nourishing, and carefully prepared, these delicate, molded towers of rice stood tall as a symbol of refinement, even on an everyday dinner table. The word timble came from the French, but American homemakers made it their own. Leftover rice wasn't just reheated, it was transformed. Cooked rice was gently mixed with beaten eggs, cream, and grated cheese, sometimes enriched with mushrooms, minced ham, or a touch of onion. Poured into buttered ramekins or tin molds, the mixture was then baked in a warm oven inside a water bath, until it set firm yet soft, like a custard with structure. And then came the reveal. Each mold was flipped onto a plate, sliding out in one perfect piece. Smooth sides, gently domed top, steam rising. The aroma was subtle but comforting, warm grains, a whisper of nutmeg, maybe even a trace of brown cheese. They were served alongside roasts, stews, or vegetables in cream sauce. But they could also stand on their own, with a ladle of tomato puree or mushroom gravy spooned lovingly over the top. In those gaslight-era kitchens, this wasn't just clever, it was culinary grace. Taking something as plain as rice and turning it into a thing of dignity. Today, we pile rice onto plates without a second thought. But in 1925, savory rice Timbles reminded everyone at the table that even the simplest ingredient could rise to greatness, with time, care, and just a little imagination. So maybe the question isn't, why did we stop making them? Maybe it's, what else have we forgotten to honor? In the quiet glow of a 1925 supper table, where linen napkins were pressed and dishes were served with intention, there came a dish that looked simple, but whispered tales of old-world comfort and new-world charm. Welsh Rare Bit. Don't be fooled by the name. There's no rabbit here. Only cheese, melted, spiced, and poured like gold. This dish, pronounced Rare Bit, had crossed the Atlantic from Britain, but by the 1920s, it had earned its place in American middle-class kitchens, especially for lighter Sunday suppers or meatless evenings. It began with a roux, butter, flour, and milk or ale, cooked into a smooth, bubbling base. To this, sharp cheddar was folded in, along with dry mustard, paprika, sometimes Worcestershire sauce, and a splash of beer or cream for depth. The result? A sauce that was silky, rich, and unapologetically savory. But this wasn't spooned into bowls. It was ladled over toast points, triangles of crisp, lightly buttered bread, arranged in perfect formation on a plate. The sharp, molten cheese soaked in just enough to soften the crust, without losing its shape. Welsh Rare Bit was comforting yet cultured. It was served at ladies' luncheons, student teas, and gaslight suppers where conversation lingered longer than the meal. And while the ingredients were simple, the presentation was dignified, and the flavor unforgettable. Today, it's almost vanished, replaced by packaged cheese and microwave shortcuts. But if you close your eyes, you can still picture that thick velvet sauce, that crackle of toast beneath, and that feeling of something warm and familiar, served not with fanfare, but with quiet affection. Welsh Rare Bit on toast points wasn't just food. It was a little act of ceremony on an ordinary weekday night. No sizzling pans, no bubbling pots, just the soft clink of a jar lid, the glow of magenta brine, and a supper plate as quiet and comforting as the twilight it was served in. This was pickled beets and eggs, the unsung hero of the cold supper plate in 1925. In a time before refrigeration was common in every home, cold dishes weren't an afterthought, they were a necessity. And this one? It was a favorite across rural and industrial towns alike. Hard-boiled eggs, shelled and smooth, were gently lowered into a jar of beet brine. The beets, already cooked and sliced, released their deep crimson hue into a vinegar-sugar spice mixture. And within a day or two, the eggs transformed, tinted purple, soaked with tang, and beautifully marbled inside. The longer they sat, the deeper the flavor. Sweet, sour, earthy, unmistakable. Served cold, often straight from the cellar or icebox, these eggs were laid beside their beet companions on a chilled plate, sometimes with a dollop of horseradish or a slice of rye bread. This was a meal that didn't demand heat. It demanded memory. For many, it tasted like Pennsylvania Dutch kitchens, or summer afternoons in coal towns, or a grandmother's pantry lined with rows of glistening jars. And though humble, this plate was balanced: protein, vegetable, acid, and color. It sustained mill workers, fed farmhands, and satisfied families on days when the stove stayed cold. Today, we scroll past recipes like this: too simple, too strange, too old. But in 1925, pickled beets and eggs were a flavor of home, a legacy in glass, and a promise that food didn't need to be hot, to be full of heart. In an era when every dish had its place, and every plate told a story, number 1920's supper table felt complete without something cool, quivering, and jewel-toned in the center. Enter cranberry and apple gelatin salad. This wasn't dessert, though it looked like one. It was a salad, served cold and sliced, meant to sit proudly beside roast capon, veal loaf, or chicken croquettes. At a time when molded foods were a sign of refinement and care, gelatin salads became a canvas for color and creativity. And this one? This was a classic of its kind. Homemakers would begin by simmering fresh or canned cranberries with sugar until they burst, creating a ruby red base, tart and sweet. Finely chopped apples, firm and crisp, were stirred in for crunch and contrast. Sometimes celery, sometimes walnuts, depending on the region and family tradition. All of it was folded into lemon or plain gelatin, then poured into a ring mold or glass dish, and left to chill overnight. By morning, it shimmered like stained glass, deep red, speckled with fruit, cool to the touch, and bursting with old-fashioned charm. This wasn't just about flavor. It was about texture, presentation, and the gentle pride that came with bringing something beautiful from the icebox to the table. At holiday meals, it became tradition. But even in the warm months, it served as a light, refreshing counterpoint to richer dishes. A palate cleanser. A conversation piece. Today, gelatin salads have all but vanished from our kitchens. They're remembered, sometimes mocked, often misunderstood. But in 1925, cranberry and apple gelatin salad was a signature of grace, a sign that you took the time to prepare something thoughtful, lovely, and lovingly chilled. And when the light caught it just right, it didn't just glisten, it glowed. And now, we end not with a bang, but with a whisper of sweetness from a long-forgotten dining table. Queen pudding with meringue topping. A dessert as regal as its name. Yet born not in castles, but in humble American kitchens, where every ingredient had to be stretched, and nothing ever went to waste. It began with crumbs, yes, stale breadcrumbs, soaked in warm milk, sweetened gently, and baked with whipped egg yolks until they puffed into a golden custard base. Then came the crown. A layer of tart raspberry jam was spread gently over the warm pudding. And on top of that, a soft cloud of meringue, whipped egg whites and sugar, beaten until they held firm peaks like lace in motion. Baked once more, just until kissed with gold, it emerged from the oven light, airy, fragrant. Fit for a queen, yet made by mothers who ruled their kitchens with heart, not riches. In 1925, this pudding was a quiet triumph, a way to end a meal with grace, even when money was tight. It was the dessert of Sunday suppers, church potlucks, and cherished handwritten cookbooks passed from one generation to the next. And maybe, just maybe, that's what this journey has been about. Not just the recipes, but the lives behind them. The voices we can still hear in the stir of a spoon or the rise of a warm custard. If this video stirred something in you, a memory, a smile, a hunger for more forgotten American food stories, then consider joining us here. Subscribe to the channel to help keep these recipes and the people who once made them alive in spirit, one dish at a time. Because history isn't just in museums. It's in your kitchen,